Welcome to Dialogue, a true crime conversation. I'm your host, Rebekah Sebastian. Thrilled you are here. We are in week 3 of our series on advocates and nonprofits, and I'm especially excited for today's episode because it came to me in a unique and special way that I feel like I have to mention. I want to express some gratitude to 2 people who introduced me to this topic that spurred this whole episode idea. So those 2 people are my mom and dad. My parents gave me a book this summer that they thought I would like. It's called When Truth Is All You Have, a Memoir of Faith, Justice, and Freedom for the Wrongly Convicted by Jim McCloskey. Well, my parents were right. I did like it. I liked it so much that before I even finished it, I'd reached out. I went onto Centurion Ministries website, which is the organization that the writer of this book founded. And I got in touch with the author and asked him to be on Dialogue. So much to my pleasant surprise, he said yes, and here we are. So thank you, Mom and Dad, Peter and Barbara, for the book. Thank you, Jim, for saying yes to the strange request you got from this podcaster in Queens. It's worth mentioning that Jim founded this organization in Princeton, New Jersey, which is my hometown, which is why my parents had his organization and his book on their radar. We have some interesting kind of 6 to 8 degrees of separation between us, and it's just been really cool getting a window into his work. A lot of his story happens and unfolds certainly in Princeton, but throughout New Jersey. So it's just was such a fun experience reading it for that reason. But also, it's a beautiful, beautiful story of how he started an organization to help get innocent people out of prison. It's that simple, but it's so much more. It's his story, his own unique personal journey of calling and redemption. And he weaves it in beautifully to the story of all the people that he's helped exonerate. And I shouldn't say all, because to date, there have been 64, and you'll hear about that later. In the book he pulls out, there's probably maybe a dozen cases in the book. So select cases, but certainly not all. There's a foreword by a small little author you may have heard of named John Grisham, and he comes up too. So this is just chock full of great information, good tidbits, and just a wonderful man who uses his story to help others. I don't know how else to say it. I think you're going to be a fan by the end of this. If you care about wrongful convictions, and I would add if you even just care about justice, this one is for you. And this is something we need to be thinking about more and thinking about ways we can be part of the solution, because this is a major problem, as you're going to hear. With that, I will let Jim tell you the rest of the beautiful story. His book is called When Truth Is All You Have, and I will link to that in the show notes, as well as Centurion Ministries. With that, let's kill the small talk with Jim McCloskey. Jim, welcome to Dialogue, a true crime conversation. I'm so pleased that the day has finally come for us to talk.
Well, I've been looking forward to it ever since you first contacted me, Rebekah, and this is a great way to start the week off. So I look forward to our conversation.
I feel the same way. Offline we were just talking about how the worst thing you can imagine outside of a terminal disease is being in prison when it's wrong and you're innocent and you didn't do something. And I think that's something people can certainly put themselves into that place and imagine that would be true. And yet, for so long, that was a very difficult concept. The idea that there are people who are innocent in jail is only something recently it seems that people are receptive to even accepting. So let's get into Centurion Ministries and how it was the first innocence organization before the Innocence Project. And now, so many people are doing this work, and I think it's a bit more understood. But when you started this, it wasn't. So maybe you could share a little bit about how that all came to be.
Yes, well, I started this work in 1980. And at that time, I was I was 30, even though I was 37 years old, I had decided to leave the business world and go into ministry. So I was in my second year at Princeton Theological Seminary. And as part of my field education requirement, I served as a student chaplain at Trenton State Prison. Now, at that time, nobody was doing this work on any kind of an organized, systemic basis. Maybe a case here and a case there of wrongful convictions would surface somewhere in the United States. And when I started this work and became a chaplain, I was with where everybody else was in the public, and namely that I thought our criminal justice system was basically flawless, that if you were convicted of a any crime, but a serious crime, you were certainly guilty. And that was the end of that. I didn't dream, nor did I even think about the possibility of the high incidence of wrongful convictions that I discovered later on as I got deeper into this work. So yeah, I felt that while I was a student chaplain, let me just say that's when I encountered my first individual who was proclaiming his innocence. His name was Jorge de los Santos, nicknamed Chiefy, Chiefie. He was in the 6th or 7th year of a Newark, New Jersey murder, doing a life sentence. And my job was to go cell to cell. I had about 40 cells on a cell block, 2 cell blocks. And I would just go cell to cell and talk with them about whatever they wanted to talk about, not to evangelize or do anything of that nature. It was just to be their friends. Anyway, Chiefy would, every time I came to his cell, all he would talk about was, I didn't do this, I don't belong here. Not only would he proclaim his innocence, but he would also tell me that the police and prosecutors knowingly, purposefully framed him. Now that was beyond, that's something I could not accept. I said, Chiefy, I'm sorry. I don't know if you're innocent or not, but I don't believe the police or the prosecutors would knowingly present false testimony. Long story short, over several months and a lot of conversation with him while I would visit him. He and I got along particularly well, and we really enjoyed each other's company and conversation. He was 33 years old, of Puerto Rican descent, out of the public housing projects in Newark, a former heroin addict for many years, who was married to a lovely woman, Elena, who really supported him. But I would allow him, against the rules, to call me at home and to discuss this further. Anyway, I came to believe he was innocent, but he challenged me. This is getting close to Christmas, December 1980, and he said, look, you've read my trial transcript. I've answered every question you've posed to me. I have a question for you. I said, oh boy, here we go. So I said, well, what's that? He said, do you believe I'm innocent? And I said, well, yeah, I do, Chiefy. He says, well, what are you going to do about it? I said, what do you mean, what am I going to do about it? I'm a former businessman. I'm a seminary student. I have no experience. I've never even been in a courthouse, let alone any experience in the criminal justice system, not even as a juror. He said, well, I've been on my knees for the last 6 years praying to God for God to bring somebody around to be my angel and free me from this hellhole here. And he said, and you're the man, whether you like it or not, or whether you know it or not, you're that man. Now, what are you going to do? You're going to go back to your nice, safe, secure little seminary and pray for me? That's not going to get me out of here. God works through human hands. This is him talking to me. So I was shocked. I was stunned. I said, well, let me give it some thought. I went back to the seminary and I reflected on it. I prayed. I went into scripture and came upon a passage in the prophet of Isaiah, who 2,700 years ago wrote that they go to law dishonestly, they lie, truth is fallen from the public squares, there is no justice. The Lord wondered why there was no one to intervene and was displeased that there was no one. And then I thought, well, maybe, is this a sign I am to intervene? And I decided that that's probably what was expected of me from God. I felt a calling, so I went back and gave him a Christmas present and gave myself a Christmas present as well. This was not only for him, but it's also for me, because I had spent the last 18 months cloistered in the seminary studying church history and the scriptures and theology and all that. I was ready to go back out into the world for a little while. So I took a year off from school and worked on his behalf. And that started the whole mission.
Well, and lest anybody think, a very pious man who has a background in business, now going to be this saintly guy, helping free the innocent, I think they should read your book. Because What I love about it is that that's not at all the story you tell. In addition to these amazing stories of these, you highlight some select cases from over the decades of your work. You also weave in your own story into that. And it is not what most people, maybe just on a cursory hearing you or reading about you, might expect. And you don't hide it. You don't hide the doubt, of the shaking of your faith, and that you weren't perfectly positioned to be this person, necessarily, right? I mean, you don't shy away from your warts, I guess.
No, no. As I told my a good friend of mine, my good friend, and also happens to be my minister here in Princeton, when I gave him an advanced copy of the book, I said, Dave, when you read this, I just want to let you know, I've let a number of my skeletons out of the closet, but there are still a few left in there for later on.
For good
Um,
measure.
but anyway, you're right. I mean, my moral compass over the years as an adult, from when I graduated from college to when I went to the seminary at the age of 37, there were a lot of years that were I certainly did not behave in a way that was all pleasing to God, nor, I might add, to myself. Uh, I was uh, I was not leading a good life, morally speaking. I'm speaking of, but at the same time, my faith started to grow, so there was a conflict within me. I had one foot very much in the secular world, and I'll leave that up to the viewer's imagination. And I had another foot in the spiritual world, because something was really missing in my life, as after working in the business world for 15 years back, both in Tokyo and my hometown of Philadelphia. And I didn't feel as if, well, I knew I was leading a selfish, superficial, serving only myself, no one else. And at the same time, I'm feeling this lack of purpose, lack of mission, no real authentic way of living, in my view, about myself. I felt the hand of God saying, okay, it's time to give up that part of the world, your worldliness, and go serve me, follow me. And so I did. And I left I was tired of leading this double or triple life, Rebekah, and it wore me down. And I wanted to announce to the world who I really am. And I'd like to think then, and hopefully now, a person who wants to follow his faith. And that's the priority in my life. And so I gave up the business world and went up to the seminary, believing that with my intention of getting a 3-year Master of Divinity degree, which I eventually did, and then going on to become an ordained Presbyterian church pastor. But as it turned out, it didn't work out that way.
No, it often doesn't, right? The best laid plans. And, I think it's so interesting because it feels like what you're talking about, going to seminary, this sort of epiphany you have about you want to pour more into the scriptures and have this life of devotion to God, reorienting your life back into the spiritual path. And actually, the act of doing that took you right out of the seminary walls and into prisons and into just like messy complexities of human disaster, like our criminal justice system, people's choices, all these things. And that actually, to me, it looks like that was the real expression of your faith. That looks like where your faith really grew and blossomed and became very genuine. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, my faith was the absolute inspiration to change my life. And let me just say this, a number of scriptural passages really spoke to me as I was struggling with this decision. And by the way, I consulted with no one, because if you knew me then, and you even, and I had indicated to you that I'm thinking of becoming a church pastor, you would have been shocked. So I didn't even consult with my family. The only person I consulted with was my pastor, Dick Streeter, of the church I belonged to and was pretty active in. And he just said, listen, just open your heart, read the scriptures. God will lead you where he wants you to go. And that turned out to be the case. So it was inspired by the scriptures became my meat and drink. I just devoured them. I saw them and the gospels as the truth of the matter. And then what really was the coup de grace is when I'm struggling with this decision, and I open up one of the gospels, and And the Christ says, he who saves his life will lose it. He who loses his life for my sake will find it. So off to the seminary I went, and with some, really no indecision. It was clear in my mind what I was to do, and off to the seminary I went.
Right. So this conversation with Chiefy happens. You're a student chaplain. You're not yet ordained. You're wearing the collar. You're showing up and you're hearing these men's stories. And you decide, okay, I'm gonna look into them. And that's sort of when things really start snowballing. And you just sort of keep doing the next right thing and then the next, or maybe you don't even know if it's right, but the next thing and then the next thing. So what do you uncover as you start looking into his case?
What I did, I told Chiefy in December of 1980 that I've accepted his challenge and he's right. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take a year off from school. And that was the entire calendar year of 1981. I'm going to do several things, Chiefy. I'm going to try and find you a good lawyer, and I'm going to give a crack, although I have no experience at this, I'm going to give it a crack of investigating the case myself. I had met two private investigators, and for whatever reason, I didn't trust them. So I said, well, I'll take this on myself and see what happens. Well, long story short, I investigated the case. I found the witnesses against him. I found new witnesses, got a great lawyer, Paul Castellero, who is still with, actually, he gave up his solo practice of many years and joined Centurion as our legal director 5-6 years ago. But anyway, Paul and I worked together, and I found the star witness against Jorge de los Santos, a man by the name of Richard De La Sante, who turned out to be a career criminal and had given what they call jailhouse confession testimony in other cases, both before and after Chiefy's conviction, which he had denied at trial under direct examination by the prosecutor. In other words, he said, I'm not an informant. This is the only time I've ever testified against anybody, when in fact we were able to establish that that was a lie, because we developed a whole history of his informant and testifying activities in other cases. And when Paul got permission from the judge, the federal judge, to go into the prosecutor's files, he discovered in those files, in the trial prosecutor's own handwriting, De La Sante in habit of giving testimony. So the prosecutor knew that his star witness was lying when he said, this is the only time I've ever done this. So, and also I was able to prove that the eyewitness against Mr. De Los Santos had ever offered false testimony as well to get out from his own problems with the law. They were all these characters, the witness against Chiefy and Chiefy himself. Yeah. They were drug addicts in Newark. And it was just and I said to Chief, why would the police care about you, Chiefy? You're a junkie. You're in and out of jail, not for any serious crimes, but drug possession, etc. Why would they try and put a case on you? He said, it's very easy, because I'm a throwaway. They can clear the case, get their conviction, look good, and move on.
Right.
And as it turned out, he was right, because we proved to the federal judge's satisfaction that this was a bad conviction, and it was based on prosecutorial misconduct, in that they suborned perjury.
Let's park here. You've learned so much, and your book illuminates so much about the criminal justice system. And that's something that has, for me, become a serious interest that's come out of my true crime interest. Believe it or not, this true crime genre has spurred a real deep interest in our system, because you can't read these stories and not think about the trials that happened and what went wrong, and when do we get it right and when do we get it wrong. And I think that's true for a lot of true crime listeners. So these jailhouse informants and this sort of problematic theme comes up a lot in a lot of the cases you talk about in the book. We can agree it's a problem, but what do you think the alternative is? If the prosecution and the police stop using people in this way, it's really manipulative, it's not truthful, what could they do instead to secure the conviction? Is that where we need to be thinking?
I'll tell you what they could do to secure a conviction, and that is to look for legitimate, truthful, credible evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I run into this. This is one of many causes of wrongful convictions: the use of common criminals to offer false evidence against the innocent defendant.
Right.
Um, to use jailhouse confession, this has been debunked throughout the country over the last 10, 15 years, the use of jailhouse. There have been scandal after scandal in different cities regarding the use of jailhouse informant testimony. It should be, in my view, it should be outlawed. They should not use this kind of testimony, because I've encountered numerous cases of this kind of testimony. Not one of them was correct. Not only that, but it has put innocent people on death row who came very close to execution based on jailhouse confession testimony. I want to give you one quick example, if I can.
Please.
Ellen Reasonover. Now, she was convicted in St. Louis for the murder of a gas station attendant. One Saturday evening, when she's living with her mother and her 2-year-old and Ellen's 2-year-old daughter, Ellen went out to do the family laundry. She ran out of change. She drove up to a gas station outside St. Louis, in a suburb of St. Louis, and she saw an African-American man in the cashier's cage. He looked at her and then decided that he went out a side door, got into a car, and drove away. Well, she thought he was just closing up for the night. It was close to 11:30 or midnight. She wakes up the next morning and she sees on TV and reads in the paper that the white gas station attendant had been found murdered in a side room of that gas station. What does she do? She comes forward and tells the local police that she was there and what she saw, an African-American man. What did they do? They arrested her. They arrested Ellen Reasonover. Now you ask why? Well, it doesn't make any sense. Her older brother, Stephen, was in prison for a number of armed robberies. So they figure she's bad seed. She's coming forward to lead us astray, to misdirect the investigation. That's just pure unfounded speculation. So they put her in a jail cell, and they get a female criminal in the same jail cell to come forward and say, while we were together, Ellen confessed the shooting. Then they take her from the local jail and they put her in the county jail, and they get another career woman criminal to say she confessed to the crime. Long story short, she was, we were able to exonerate her, because when we got a federal judge, we finally got a federal judge to once again allow us to go into to have full access to the prosecutor's office files. And what did we see there? Another tape of the first jailhouse confession. That cell they had surreptitiously, they being the police, had taped. And all Ellen did in those conversations with those inmates was proclaim her innocence.
Oh my gosh.
So they made up a false jailhouse confession, even though they had physical taped evidence that this was false. Ellen came within one vote of getting the death penalty, 11-1 for death. So it just, it's highly disturbing that they use this kind of testimony, and they're allowed to do so, because so often, most of the time, it results in justice going awry.
Right. Right, which only, comes down the line, it's going to come back to them. And this comes up a lot on my podcast. The DA office not wanting to be wrong and wanting to win. So I want to talk about that. It sounds like if they don't allow this, if it were outlawed, they'd be slower to bring charges to people and maybe not as many convictions. And then that's interpreted as a loss. So how then can you sell this to the police and to the DA to be able to get on board with something where they can't rely on this?
Well,
because there's just not going to be as many cases, probably.
That's developing, and that's coming along.
Okay.
One glimmer of hope that we have in terms of the overall macro criminal justice system and its evolution and its growing awareness that this phenomena of false convictions is far more systemic than we had believed or imagined. So now a number of district attorney offices across the country, I don't know, they're growing, 55, 60 of them. We're dealing with 3 right now. one in Philadelphia, St. Louis, and Dallas, they've established their conviction integrity unit.
Yes.
And that is a separate unit within the office, staffed by assistant DAs and DA investigators to revisit former convictions where there's a possibility that it was a misplaced conviction, the misfiring of justice,
Yeah.
a wrongful conviction. And so of the 64 people that Centurion has freed over the years, the last 40 years to be exact, we have been able to work with, not against, but with, in 12 cases, the local district attorney's office.
Yeah.
However, in most instances, even today, they'll drag their feet and fight you tooth and nail. But when you do find a prosecutor who's legitimately interested in justice and truth, that's what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds Pollyannish and Sunday schoolish, but that's what it comes down to. What's the objective? Is the objective to win?
Right.
Put notches in your belt, whether you're the police who want to clear a case, or the prosecutor, whether you want to get a conviction, or are they genuinely looking at the truth of the matter? Because, who wants an innocent person in prison? And not only that, when they are in prison, the real perpetrator's out there. Doing other crimes, by the way.
This is the key for me. When people have a hard time getting their head around this, or maybe can't find it in themselves to care about this cause, and I know there's a lot to care about in the world, and we can't care about everything, but I'm like, if for no other reason, we've heard enough stories. I had an exoneree on a couple of months ago. While he was sitting in prison for the crime he didn't commit, the man who did it raped and killed somebody else, and that's how they eventually, when they did retest the DNA, they found it. I mean, that's what's happening. So for that reason alone, isn't that a reason to care? Like public safety.
Yes.
If you don't want to be compassionate about it, you can be selfish about it if that's
Right.
the motivation needed. But I know an ADA who works in a conviction integrity unit, that's such important work. And you talk in your book about the partnership with a DA when they do come alongside your organization and open the doors and the files and work with you. I mean, how much faster can things happen, right?
Absolutely. If you have a DA working with you
Yeah.
and not against you, it's like the Red Sea opens up, because the judges who have to make an evaluation, is this a bad conviction that's deserving to be tossed or vacated, then that judge feels far more secure in vacating the conviction if the law enforcement, if the district attorney, I should say, is behind this.
Now, I was familiar with conviction integrity units, but you brought up something in the book called innocence commissions. Can you talk about what those are and what the difference is?
Well, North Carolina has one. They've established an independent commission, a statewide commission made up of very experienced either retired judges and people who have quite a bit of experience in the criminal justice system on both sides, to review the petitions of innocence that come their way. In other words, the person's been convicted, they're still in prison, and so now there's something about this conviction that isn't right, and so they reevaluate it, they reinvestigate it, and then they have the power to reverse the conviction. New Jersey, the Attorney General of New Jersey has set up a statewide conviction integrity unit, so to speak, not an individual county conviction integrity. So there's a difference. But what should happen, Rebekah, and I do speak about this in the book towards the end, is we've taken on. There have been over 2,600 exonerations documented in the United States since 1989, well documented by the National Registry of Exonerations, which was formed by two prestigious law schools, and they keep track and document all the exonerations and take part across the United States. In not one instance that I'm aware of, the conviction has been reversed, vacated, the person has been exonerated, but in not one instance has any authority in that state or in the county or anywhere said, let's hold a public inquiry and see what went wrong in this particular conviction, and with full subpoena power, to reinvestigate, bring folks in who had any part or role in this conviction for the prosecution, police, or defense, and let's examine this conviction and understand what went wrong in order to help us prepare a report and hold the people, those wrongdoers, feet to the fire, and alert the system. This went wrong here. This went wrong here. Let's be careful in future cases, not to allow that to happen in other cases. That happened. We've had 2 Canadian cases.
Right.
In both of those Canadian cases, one in Saskatoon, the other in Winnipeg, we exonerated those 2 different men in 2 different cases, and that kind of a public inquiry was conducted by the local provincial executives and judiciary. And it's very useful, but it's never happened in the United States.
So what is the resistance? I would imagine, 1, we have a higher volume of cases here, probably. 2, well, that's my only question. What is the resistance? Is it resources?
I don't think so. You can have reason. You can, if something's important enough, you can always find the resources to do it. And just look, I'm not pointing my finger at Dallas or Texas, because it happens all over the United States. It happens in Newark and Philadelphia, where I'm from, to a large extent as well. But in Dallas, since 2007, when the first conviction integrity unit was set up in the United States by the local Dallas District Attorney, Craig Watkins, and we were involved in 2 of those cases, close to 40 men and women, mostly men, have been exonerated. I mean, exonerated, and have received compensation from the state for the wrongful incarceration. All convicted, all investigated by the Dallas police and convicted by the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. This is over the years now. You would think somebody in Dallas would say, wait a minute, we got a problem down here. Let's take a look at this. Let's have a public inquiry and examine at least one and several. Let's see what the common themes are, the common causes amongst all these exonerations of wrongful convictions. And let's really study this and thereby see what the problems are and possibly enact and push for new legislation to prevent this from happening in other cases.
So it's pride. I mean,
the Canadians are a kinder, gentler people. Yeah. I really believe that. And I don't know what it is about we Americans and our insistence on not admitting that we're wrong, at least in the criminal justice system. And we don't want to deal with that. Let's just deal. We got enough problems. Let's not revisit the past here. They don't want to be embarrassed by having this brought to the public light and examined publicly about what their predecessors and those who are currently in the office, the wrongdoing that they've done. They protect each other.
Yeah, and I think it goes hand in hand with the conversation happening in our country around police reform right now. I mean, the same sentiment of that fear. I think there's a lot of fear in some departments, not all, to really examine the systemic root issues and causes, as opposed to just, okay, we'll fire more bad cops. Like, that's not the true central problem. And this ties right into cases and the system, right? Those go hand in hand. So it's that same issue. And I don't know how the tide is going to keep. I hope it feels it's moving.
Let me tell you, there is movement. Okay. There is positive. This is depressing enough of a subject. There is some positive movement. Okay. And that is this, that almost 90%. Now we, Centurion, we only work on state county cases. In other words, we don't get involved in federal cases.
Got it.
It's all state, county by county. And almost 85-90% of the counties in the United States, there's 4,000 some, they elect their district attorneys. Okay, they're not appointed. In New Jersey, they're appointed. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, they're elected. And now what we're finding, because again of this general awareness, almost through osmosis, that wrongful convictions are happening in this country, there is a greater sense because of these uh, fatal shootings of people of color by police across the country, a need for criminal justice reform. That has started to develop and take root, uh, both on a national and local level. As a result, district attorneys, reform-minded, progressive candidates for district attorneys have been elected across the land.
Yes.
This is happening. We see this time and again in Boston, Philadelphia, St. Louis City, St. Louis County, Los Angeles, all over the United States. There are these reform-minded DAs who recognize that this criminal justice system leaves a lot to be desired. It is racially biased against people of color and marginalized communities. We need to re-examine this and effect change. Now, that's not easy to do, because then most of the time you're faced with a police culture, not the prosecutor, but you're faced with a police culture that really resists change.
Yeah.
And then the local police agency and the local district attorney that's run by a reform-minded executive, they bump heads, and that creates problems.
Right.
It's a tough job, but it's starting to happen. But we have so far to go.
I know it. I always say, I'm sure my listeners are sick of hearing this, but if there's one thing I've learned in my 75 interviews on this podcast, it's voting for your local DA is one of the most important things you can do as a citizen to be engaged if this stuff matters to you. And I honestly had not given that a lot of thought prior. So for that alone, I'm grateful for the for the experience. This is a question about, I think people have a perception that everybody in jail and prison is proclaiming their innocence.
Thank you. Yeah.
And have you encountered that?
Yeah, no, a great question. Thank you for asking. That is just a canard. It's not true.
Right.
When I hit Trenton State Prison in 1980 and was assigned 2 cell blocks of 40 men, each in their own cell, and I would go cell to cell, only one of those 40 men was proclaiming his innocence, and that was Mr. De Los Santos. Surprisingly, as I'm standing in front of their cell dressed in black with a collar, I look like an Irish priest. A number of the inmates told me what they did. And there were some horrendous crimes I was receiving, if you will, confessions about, which surprised me. I've been in easily over 100 jails and prisons and spoken with a number of inmates, a lot of them guilty, some not, obviously. And no, my experience is they don't all say they're innocent. In fact, most of them don't say they're innocent. But somehow, I don't know where that started from, but most people in the public will commonly say, well, they all say they're innocent. Well, that's simply not true in my experience at all.
Good. I'm glad to hear you clarify that, because that is a perception. I don't know if it came from mainstream movies or television. I don't know. But there is this idea that everybody's innocent. So, like, why should we even start listening to one story? Because they're all saying that.
Exactly. And now I go out and I speak to different groups before the coronavirus. When I started this work, after we freed De Los Santos in 1983, and I got my Master of Divinity, rather than going on and become a church pastor, I started up Centurion Ministries. And then throughout the 1980s, I would go out, and in the 90s, I would go out and speak to different community groups about what I consider to be a national problem. Mm-hmm. I was met with a wall of cynicism. Come on, we have the best. There's another thing that people like to say. We have the best criminal justice system in the world. Well, wait a minute. How do you know that? Where does that come from? Again, we always think we have the best system of anything in the world, when in fact we don't. In a number of systems, okay? And I'd be willing to bet that America, the United States, have more wrongful false convictions on a relative basis as well as an absolute basis than the other Western societies do. We're somehow, we have a more primitive kind of attitude about these things. We're hard-nosed, lock them up, kill them. Now even the federal government's starting to execute people again. for the first time in a while.
Well, these misperceptions that everybody's claiming innocence, and
Yeah,
two, that we have the best criminal justice system in the world.
yeah, right. Well, so we don't. I mean, we simply don't. When all these wrongful convictions emerge and come to the surface, there's no remedial action, really.
Right.
Okay, they might have, some states have enacted different police procedures for conducting lineups, or, the interrogation of suspects, that kind of a thing. But there's really hard resistance on the part of law enforcement to really institute meaningful, rooted change.
Hey diehards, it's me, Rebekah. Sorry to interrupt the interview. Isn't Jim great? I just wanted to pop on and say thank you for listening. Seriously, thank you. It means more to me than you know, and the show is growing, but we have a long way to go. I have big plans and so many ideas for 2021, and I can't do them without you. If you have yet to leave a review for Dialogue on Apple Podcast, could you do that? Could you hit me with a 5-star and a little written review? It doesn't have to take long. In fact, you could do it now. I'll wait. Just hit pause, do the review, and come back to the interview. Okay, cool. Also, if you want to chat with me on social media, I am very active on Twitter and Instagram, and I am at Dialogue Pod on both platforms. That's at Dialogue Pod, DIEALOGUE Pod on both platforms. If you would like to visit my website, you can drop me a note there through the contact form. It's RebekahSebastian.com. All of this will be linked in the show notes. Please get in touch with me. I'd love to hear what you want to see for 2021. Who have I not interviewed that you're just dying to hear from? What series or themes have I not covered yet? Talk to me. Let's kill the small talk, you and me. Okay, back to the interview. Talk to you later. This episode is presented by Curator. Curator is an all-encompassing, curated lifestyle membership for the modern woman. With style expert Rachel Zoe at the helm, Curator delivers member value via the curated lens of confidence, convenience, and community. Curator delivers coveted name-brand fashion, beauty, and home essentials right to your door every season. Each seasonal box of style includes 5 pieces to elevate your style. The new winter curation features products from trailblazing female founders and designers to help you feel a bit more chic and confident this holiday season. Become a member now to get the winter curation, unlock year-round access to the members-only shop, and receive exclusive member benefits. Rachel Zoe's Curator is exclusively offering our listeners $30 off by using the code PODGO30 at Curator.com. That's PODGO, PODGO 30 for $30 off at Curator.com. CURATEUR.com. More than just a box, you're a trusted partner in living a life well curated. Is there, by chance, a country you can point to who might be getting this right, and not just in conviction rate, but also in sentencing and criminal and rehabilitation? I feel like that's something too that has to be part of the conversation. And in general, it seems like in Europe, there's much shorter sentences, and some people criticize that. Some think it's healthier, and there's more of an emphasis on life after prison.
Yeah, when I started out this work in 1980, if you were convicted of murder, even in the United States, you would do 15 to 20 years, and you were out. Okay, and then
Right.
The whole mass incarceration thing started. Law and order. All the politicians wanted to stand on the law enforcement and throw them away, lock them up. 3 strikes and you're out for the rest of your life. And all of this with the crack cocaine epidemic that took hold in America in the 1980s and 1990s. Anyway, the point being that we had the America's criminal justice system nationally took the view, lock them up. And now, if you get convicted of murder or very serious crimes, you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison, essentially. Now, in Europe, I'm not an expert on this, but I know that, like in Holland and the Scandinavian countries, they have far more lenient sentences because they believe that there should be at least potential for rehabilitation of people who've been convicted of crimes, no matter how serious. So there's a second chance built into the sentencing mentality and laws in these Western societies in Europe, unlike here.
Yeah, feels like we're a long way from that. And again, I know there's outliers and there are truly, I don't like using the word evil, but people whose crimes, maybe really warrant them being out of society forever. But I think our prisons, and you would know way better than me, might be flooded with people where that's just simply not the case.
Well, I think people might be surprised now. These are 2016 statistics. But I don't think it's changed all that much in the last couple of years. Again, we focus on counties and states. There are about 1,300,000 state prison inmates. Okay?
Okay.
1,350,000 state inmates in state prisons, not county jails,
Right.
not federal, not local jails, state prisons. 25 to 30% of them have been convicted and are serving basically life sentences for either sexual assault or homicide.
Okay.
Or a combination of both in one crime. About half, almost half, a little more than half are in for some kind of violent crime. The other half are in for nonviolent crimes. Property, drugs, different non-violent, where nobody was hurt during the commission of a crime, nor even attempted to be hurt. They were just self-inflicted crimes, if you will, or they did harm to other people's property, but not person.
Right.
Half of our state prison population consists of inmates in those circumstances for those reasons. But they're given lengthy sentences under the old rubric of lock them up and throw the key away, that swept the United States in the 80s and the 90s. Again, and now with the coronavirus, of course, now people are talking about let's look at the nonviolent inmates and see if we can set them free earlier than expected, and that's even in the midst of this pandemic. That's not really happening.
No.
It's nominal. They're still locked up. Again, we have our criminal justice, those who administer our criminal justice, we have a whole mentality that's very, very different from that mentality that I try to describe in the Western European countries.
Yeah.
We have a lot to learn. In other words, we have a lot to learn. Why not? And maybe some states do. I know some corrections officials have done this. They recognize the problem that we're talking about right now, and they have sent their administrators and executives over to Europe to study
Wow.
how their sentencing and corrections facilities and environment, to see if there's a way that we might learn from them and incorporate those technical and administrative solutions here in the United States.
That's encouraging. That is encouraging to hear.
So, I don't want to paint too broad a brush, okay?
Sure.
Because everything I say, you can always point to an exception. But like even the state prisons, I mean, they say because of budgetary reasons, they've eliminated vocational training, reading, literacy. Our job is to basically what they're saying is we're only concerned, and we're primarily concerned with security of our institution, of our prison, that there's no trouble, no riots. So our job is to warehouse them, not to prepare them for eventual freedom.
Have you ever heard of the Enneagram by any chance?
What?
The Enneagram?
No.
Okay, then I'm taking a course in, it's a nonprofit called Enneagram Prison Project. And the Enneagram is, I don't want to go on too long about this, but it's a more spiritual and ancient personality profile. Essentially, there's 9 numbers, and apparently everybody is a number on this circle. Anyway, they're teaching it in prisons, in a few select prisons in America, with the idea that everybody's in a prison of their own making. So if anybody can find themselves, kind of understand themselves and their basic fears and motivations based on their Enneagram, it would work for inmates as well. So these aren't even wrongly convicted. These are just people who
Right.
have committed crimes and want to improve themselves.
Right.
They have to get accepted into this program. And so I'm in a class with people like me taking it, and then inmates are in it as well, formerly incarcerated. They're out now and they're on my Zoom. And it's just an incredible tool for rehabilitation, in my opinion. But we can talk about it another. I would encourage you to look into the Enneagram. I think you might find it interesting, and it actually does segue me into talking more about your personal involvement in Centurion. And I'm following your journey in the book, and I'm thinking about how you're just doing the next thing and showing up, but you're obviously well suited for this. And I wonder why you think you are, and why you were able to find things in these old cases that even, ones with defense teams, things were missed, and you go in and you essentially reinvestigate entire cases.
That's what we do.
Why do you think you're good at that? And talk about that journey.
Well, I don't know. Why am I? Well, first of all, I'm a very detailed-oriented person. But Centurion, we have to be careful not to take too many cases on, because it's a high demand for our services, and I might add a high legitimate demand. But we can only take on so many cases, because if you take on too much of a quantity, then the quality diminishes.
Sure.
So we're very quality oriented, and that is to control the number of cases that we have resources to do. But as far as your question goes, I spent, I was 37, 38 years old when I started to work when I took that year off to work for De Los Santos, and then things took off from there. And I had some pretty good life experience.
Mm-hmm.
I was a business executive, a management consultant for 12 years in Tokyo, and one of my jobs, responsibilities in my consulting company, we would work with American firms to understand the Japanese market, or the market in other Asian countries. In other words, market research.
Right.
Who are the manufacturers? Who are the distributors? Who are the retailers? We would tear apart a market piece by piece, and then come up with a strategy of how to best take advantage of the circumstances of that particular market. So, I applied this same methodology to the investigation of murder cases of the wrongfully convicted when I started Centurion. So we read the trial, we read every document before we take a case on, and it also serves as our foundation for reinvestigating the case. We get all the police reports, we get all the trial transcripts, post-conviction hearings, legal briefs. Now we understand every piece of this conviction and crime. Sometimes they're two different things. And we begin to formulate a strategy, and then we hit the field. Me, Centurion, what we do, knock on doors. Now, I have been fortunate enough, an important part of our investigation is to revisit witnesses who we have good reason to believe, based on this thorough study of the case, lied. They committed perjury. They said some incriminating, they offered false incriminating evidence as the primary witness against the defendant. And here we go. When we take a case on, it's 15 to 20 years old. It's just accumulated dust. Nobody cares about these people because they're forsaken, forgotten souls. They're not well known. And so you knock on the door, and the witness, the false witness, opens the door all those years later, and the last person they want to see or hear about, you would think, is somebody like us. Now, we don't accuse them of lying. I just present myself, who I am, what I'm doing, and if you don't mind, I know it's been a long time, a number of years. I'd like to talk about your testimony in this case. So they take the measure of you. Now, look at me. I'm not threatening. The important thing is to establish a rapport. The truth doesn't come out. The truth is not regurgitated in one swoop. It comes out in bits and pieces over time as they begin to trust and to like you and actually want to be with you, because in a lot of cases, they were intimidated and coerced into giving this testimony with a lot of threats to their family and their own well-being. We, on the other hand, take a very different approach. We sympathize with what they've gone through. We don't judge them. And anyway, eventually, uh, it begins to, they begin to understand that we're on their side. We're not against them. And they really come forward with the truth, which helps us to set the people free.
I think that is the magic of Centurion, and you see it so often in the book of that moment where you're working on this old witness and that rapport is being established and you can feel it growing and like it's going to happen, and it's really exciting, and it's probably one of the few times somebody's come along them on their side and empathize with what happened. Also, you're not above saying I might have made the same choice too. I mean, any one of us might have. I think that's a really important thing
Absolutely.
to establish.
People, uh, we're so quick to judge here in the we're just quick to judge. Oh, I mean, how can you lie against somebody and send them away to prison for the rest of their, or put them on death row? Well, if you were in that person's position and you felt the heavy, heavy hand of the law, you don't know what you would do. And here's another thing. Of the 300, I don't know what the number is now, 370 DNA exonerations in the United States that have been documented since '89, 25% of those defendants, once arrested and interrogated by the police, now they're innocent and they've later been proved to be innocent, confessed to the crime. They gave false confessions of really serious felonies, murder, sexual assault. And people would say, well, I would never confess to something I didn't do. Well, we're not as strong as we think we are. We're a far more malleable species, the humans are, than we like to think we are. You don't know what you would do unless you were in the position of these, a lot of the times, young, marginalized folks who really don't have any kind of a support system, and they're manipulated, coerced by the police. They're easy prey. They're easy prey for the police to extract a confession, albeit a false one, and solve the case.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's shocking. I guess it doesn't maybe shock some people anymore in the true crime space how often false confessions are obtained. I mean, it's amazing to watch that unravel, that process from someone who goes in and is willing to talk because they're innocent. So they think, well, what could it hurt? I didn't do it. So I'm going to be willing. They don't ask for a lawyer. They're not given the option of getting a lawyer, and that all falls apart. I mean, it happens more often than any of us.
They're in a small interrogation room for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah.
And it's bad cop, good cop. It's one cop yelling. And by the way, in those situations, so often when police are interrogating suspects, they lie. They lie to them.
And they're allowed to. They're allowed to.
Yeah, exactly. We got we found your DNA at the crime. So and so has said she or he saw you flee the scene. They just make up stuff, and they get people to say things that are so untrue and are great harm to themselves, as well as justice.
Right. I know. It's
we've had a couple of false confession cases that we've unraveled and exonerated a person, but I think most people, a lot of people, the Central Park Five. Now that's a classic example, and people want to go to that documentary. I forget the title of it.
When They See Us.
When They See Us. Thank you. People want to go to that documentary, When They See Us, and you'd get a better understanding of how and why innocent people falsely confess to serious crimes.
Yep. And now I think people are preferring to call them the Exonerated Five, which I love, kind of reclaiming that story a bit. You've had a lot of wins. I think it's 64 exonerees. Is that right? So, but there have been a couple of times where you've gone, oh my gosh, we think this guy actually maybe has done it. So what is that moment like in the pit of your stomach?
Well, first of all, just the record, the Centurion record is the following. 40 years of existence.
Mm-hmm.
We have and again, quality, not quantity, we have taken on 100 cases. Of those 100 cases, we have freed 64 people.
Amazing.
Those 64 people, by the way, have spent falsely imprisoned 1,350 years in prison.
Oh,
Now, we have completed 80 cases, 64 freed.
okay.
The other 16, we were unsuccessful. 7 of those 16 others, even with our what we like to think is a careful vetting process in selecting cases for us to commit our resources to and to take on, 7 we discovered during our investigation, once we had committed to it, in the belief that they were innocent. We were wrong. We said, we came to the understanding that this person is guilty. We thought they were innocent. I then, or my colleague, Kate, will go into the prison and let them know that we're dropping their case. Because we're not interested in freeing people who are in any way, shape, or form guilty of the crime. So we're wrong. But what we do, we admit it, we're wrong. Move on. You know, the walls of Jericho don't come tumbling down when you admit you're wrong and you made a mistake. Now, in one of those cases, it was a national case, the Roger Coleman case out of Virginia, where, you know, Roger was executed in Virginia in 1992.
Yeah.
For a rape and homicide of his sister-in-law. I worked on his behalf for 4 years. I was with him the night of his execution. I sat on the concrete floor outside his death row cell, 10 yards down from the electric chair in those days. I shared his last meal with him, which was a cold pizza delivered to the death cell. And I promised him, post-execution, Roger, I will do what I can to exonerate you. 14 years later, in 2005, working with a great lawyer, Paul Anzena out of New York, out of Washington, Paul and I convinced Governor Warner, now Senator Warner of Virginia, to allow post-execution DNA to go forward of a vaginal swab. And as it turned out, the semen on that vaginal swab turned out to be Roger's. So I publicly said I was wrong. Now, since then, you know, in the last 15 years, I've re-examined that, and I would encourage people, if they're interested, to read my view of that case. I'm still puzzled as to how he did this, because I've tracked every minute of his time in the hour of where this crime possibly took place and when. Anyway, I still question whether or not he did it, but it's tough to overcome a DNA examination.
It is.
The point is, we admit if we're wrong, we're wrong. But fortunately, out of those 80 some cases, we've been wrong 7 times.
Yeah, I mean, and that's leading by example. It goes kind of back to our earlier conversation. When there's an error found, a systemic one or an aberration, whatever it is, an acknowledgement of it goes a long way. So, you know, that's what you're supposed to do. In that Roger Coleman case, which I will link to if people, you know, some resources if people want to read about it, could that not just prove a sexual relationship with the woman and not the murder? So is that where the window of...
Yes.
Yeah.
Here, yes. All right. There's no question that the biological material was found in her.
Yeah.
Okay. And it was Roger's.
Yeah.
Now the question is, was Roger and the victim, Wanda McCoy, were they having a secret romantic relationship? And which would indicate that he may have been with her within 24 hours of her murder. That's a possibility. Now, I have no evidence. I have no information that they did have such a liaison. She was his sister-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
She was one of the, according to her husband, Roger was one of the few persons, she was a very shy woman. Roger was one of the very few persons that she would even allow into her house. Next door neighbors who lived behind the victim's house there's good reason to believe that they were the ones who did this. I won't go to that right now, but they were prime suspects during the course of my investigation of this case. And so, not only that, but Roger went to work that night. He was a coal miner in Appalachia, Grundy, Virginia, which is right on the border of Kentucky and West Virginia and southwestern Virginia. He was a coal miner. When he went to work that night at 10 o'clock in the evening, he went up to the mountain to begin work, and they announced your shift has been canceled, and that's at 10 o'clock. And she was killed, sexually assaulted and killed, anywhere between 10:30 and 11 o'clock. So from 10 p.m. to 11 o'clock is the 1 hour of window that I was referring to.
Mm-hmm.
I can trace through my investigation, physical investigation, I can trace Roger's movements of where he was and how long it took him to go from A to B. So he spoke with people at B, and then B to C, spoke with people at C, and make a very, very strong case that he had to be a ninja in order to have done that crime. He simply did not have the time or the opportunity to do that crime. So, in answer to your question, yes, there's a possibility that the reason the DNA was in her was because they had a secret romantic relationship. But again, I have to say, I don't have any proof of that. But if it was secret, it was secret. Nobody would know. So that's a possibility.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far into the case, but do you think, you seemed like you were close. Do you think he would have shared that over the years? It seems like something he would have told you to give you every piece of information.
Yeah, that's a good point. And not only was I close with him, but Kitty Behan, who was his pro bono attorney from Arnold and Porter, she was his lawyer, and she and he developed a very close relationship as well. And she insists to me that he never breathed a word. Now, maybe he felt that if he divulged this, people would say, "Oh, that he definitely killed her. He must have had an argument with her, and he killed her."
That's,
so,
right. Yeah, there's a reason to keep that to yourself. Yeah.
So, it's a mystery. It's a conundrum.
Yeah.
And it'll never be settled one way or the other.
I'm sure, from reading your book, I think I know pretty clearly where you stand on the death penalty. And I know that's probably a whole other conversation. But to me, another reason maybe to get that off the table when there's these possibilities of reasonable doubt and somebody's executed. In the meantime, it just reeks of injustice.
Well, I mean, I'm against the death penalty for a lot of different reasons, practical and moral. But it's interesting, again, empirically speaking, all right? Since the death penalty was reinstituted back in the mid-'70s, a little over 1,500 people have been executed. But during that same time, 170 men, I think most all men, maybe a woman, were exonerated off of death row as being innocent people.
Wow.
So that's for every 10 executed, one has been exonerated. That's a horrendous rate. And God knows how many more people have been executed who in fact were innocent, but didn't have the resources or the people interested to prove or try and establish that or investigate their case. And God knows how many people. Two of our exonerees, which are in the book, Kerry Max Cook spent 22 years on Texas at death row. He came within 11 days of execution. And Clarence Lee Brantley out of Conroe, Texas, he came within 6 days of execution. Ellen Reasonover, although she wasn't given the death penalty, by one vote, she could have been on death row. And if she were, we didn't come along until, like 15 years later, she could have very well been executed. So we're playing with fire here.
Yep.
Nobody, no matter how you feel about the death penalty, nobody wants to see an innocent person executed for a crime of another person. So we need to be pretty serious-minded about this.
Yeah, those numbers are really alarming. Some post conviction, post-freedom, post-exoneration talk, Centurion also equips the exonerees with how to prepare for life out of prison. So that to me is, and sadly, not everybody's path is straightforward. There's a lot of trauma that happens when you're incarcerated, guilty or not.
Right.
And some fare better than others. But can you talk about also how you equip the formerly incarcerated to handle life outside?
Well, first of all, this is hard work. I'm talking about the post-release, the
Yeah.
post-exoneration of an innocent person. We have a social worker who works with those who have been freed to help them acclimate, to point them to the right resources, because now they're all over the country.
Right.
So it's a big, widespread job to but by the time they're freed, we have become not only their advocates but their friends. After we vetted the case, that takes 3 to 5 years.
I believe
Then,
it.
once we come to believe in their innocence and decide to take that particular case on, if we're going to be successful in freeing them, it'll take anywhere from another 5 to 10 years of field work and legal work to turn the case around. Sometimes 15 years. I'm working on a Dallas case right now. It's one of my last cases. I've been working on to free Ben Spencer in Dallas, Texas for 20 years. That's another story that's in the book. But anyway, to answer your question, yeah, we do our best to work with them and their families in order to help them reacclimate. They all suffer from some degree or another of post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of them don't admit that. They don't quite understand the concept and resist the notion that they even suffer from that.
Sure.
So we help them with employment. We serve as their advocate for future employers to, as a strong, good reference. Yeah, they spent 20 years in prison, but they didn't do it. We help them assemble a package to present to the world that they are innocent and worthy of employment. So we do our best to work with them, to enable them to overcome the difficult problem of the difficult challenge, I should say, of reintegrating back in society, getting back on their feet. There have been some very notable, and we document this in the book. There have been some very notable success stories, but a few have not been able to meet the challenge.
Sure. One of those, I think, was one of the speakers at the Zoom event on December 1st that you did with John Grisham.
Yes.
Miles of Hope.
Miles of Freedom.
Miles
Yes.
of Freedom. Thank you.
That's right.
That
Right.
was that was a great one. And speaking of John Grisham, a little well-known author, he got the attention. You got his attention, and he did the foreword in your book. How did he come to be involved with you and Centurion?
Well, thank you for asking that, because I'm really kind of, if I may say, I'm kind of proud of that relationship. I first met Mr. Grisham I was in St. Louis working on a case back in 2008, and I saw where he was speaking at a local at a St. Louis event, and so I went over to that event and in the receiving line introduced myself. Oh, Jim, I know about Centurion. You guys do great work, and he went on and on. And so I said, would it be possible at some future date, could you come to Princeton and speak on our behalf at a fundraiser? He said, absolutely.
Wow.
2010, 3 years later, a couple years later, we had such an event in Princeton, and he graciously came up free of cost and spoke eloquently on our behalf at the fundraiser. And that established the relationship. And so we have become friends and comrades in the work of freeing the innocent. His only nonfiction book was The Innocent Man, about two men, four men, wrongly convicted in Ada, Oklahoma years ago. One of whom, again, Ron Williamson, was 5 days away from the executioner before he got a stay of execution. Just another instance of that happening. And so earlier this summer, I asked John if you would agree to be on our board. He agreed. He's now a Centurion board member. And as you pointed out, he spoke at our Zoom gala last week as well. So he's a good man. He's really a good man. I mean, he is so unpretentious and easy to be with and affable. And he's a great human being.
What a great person to have on Centurion's side to help advocate. That's amazing. And I'm so encouraged to hear that that's what he's really like. That makes me so happy.
Absolutely. He is the real deal.
I love that. And, I'm sure you don't want to mention this, but also one of his books is actually based on your life. Is that correct? The Guardian?
Yeah, yes, it is. He wrote The Guardians was published a year ago in October of 2019. And it's about this small little nonprofit group called Guardian Ministries, that works to free innocent people. And the central character was modeled after myself.
It's incredible.
And he said some very nice things about Centurion as an organization in the author's note as well. So yeah, that was nice.
It's incredible. I mean, and that's why I can't recommend this book more, because it's your journey. It's so much about calling and vocation, which I think people can relate to regardless. And then every case that you cover in the book is its own mini story with its own arc, right? I mean, every case has this beginning, middle, and an end, and you don't know how it's going to go. And just when you think you do, something unravels. And such a great read and so well done.
Let me say one thing about that, if I may.
Please.
I want to give credit where credit is due. And that's to my co-writer, Phil Lerman. He's a professional writer. And I have been told time in and time again that this was a page turner, an easy read.
It is.
Don't get bogged down into a lot of unnecessary detail. And it has a fluidity to it. And I give Phil credit for that style of writing. I'm the content person.
Yep.
He gave it the style. So
it worked
and
beautifully.
The idea, by the way, let me just say one more thing, if I may. The idea of alternating my personal journey to the work of Centurion, we go back and forth, and the reader will learn a lot about my own personal history, the good, bad, and the ugly of it. We got that idea from another great writer, Neil Gabler, wrote a feature article for Playboy magazine, of all things, on Centurion and my work at Centurion that was published in 2013.
No kidding.
Now, Neil, in that article, he only covered one case, the Savannah 3, which also is in the book.
Yeah.
But what he did in that article, which gave us the idea for the book, in that 7,000 word feature story that he wrote for Playboy, he alternated between my personal journey and the Savannah 3 case. So that's where we got the idea.
Oh, well, it's really nice of you to give credit where credit is due. It works beautifully. It truly is. I mean, if you want to learn more, if you're at all interested in the idea and the concepts of wrongful conviction, I think this is a great place to start because it's so personal and you're not going to be bogged down with the, it's heartbreaking. There's a lot of emotions in this book, but it moves enough in different places that you can stay with it. And so I think that's why it's going to be a good.
Let me add one other thing. There were several reasons for me writing. I retired in 2015 from the day-to-day management of Centurion, but I kept a number of cases I've been working on, and now I'm down to 2. But I wanted to write this book. I mean, that was been a dream of mine. I think we have, because of our long and hard experience in encountering the criminal justice system throughout the United States, we had a lot to say, and I wanted to say it in the book through story. Mm-hmm. So, but I also wanted to point out to the reader that, look, you can always, if for whatever reasons you've lost your zest for whatever career you're currently embarking on, you can always turn the page and start over again and find a whole new way of life and work. Which I was able to do primarily through my faith. So I didn't find my real niche in life, where I belong, my real destiny, until I was 41 years old. So I like to think it could be somewhat inspirational to those folks who, for whatever reasons, are unhappy with their station in life.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I got this book this year from my parents. and who are from Princeton and have are very aware of you and your work. And I'm 41, and I feel very much like a late bloomer in my interests because of where my life went in my early 20s and just different things that happened. I'm only now coming to what I feel I was wired to do and meant to do, and following my curiosity is what I'm calling it. And so I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to read this book, and that is one of them. I think people are going to be able to identify more than they realize with you. And also, you're perfectly imperfect, and God can use anybody. Anybody is capable of doing the work they're supposed to do. And I think it's incredibly inspirational, this book and this story. So I'm glad you pointed that out. And I just happen to be the same exact age as a lot of the beginning of the book, and it felt very, very meaningful.
Well, I can tell by this interview that you have found your calling, Rebekah.
Oh, that's very kind.
I think it's a great thing that you're doing. And it also, listen, it takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing, just to start your own operation, and you're doing it very well. And I really appreciate you taking the time, and it's quite obvious from this interview, to read the book and ask the questions that you did. So I appreciate that very much.
It's honestly my pleasure and honor. Thanks for returning my email.
I'm glad I did.
I am too. So something I ask all my guests, Jim, before they go is, what is keeping you up at night? And it's clear to me you're retired, I use air quotes, but still really hard at work. So your brain is always going, it seems. What's going on up there right now at night? Do I dare ask?
I'm going to be honest with you. I sleep like a baby at night. I don't have trouble sleeping.
Good.
Now, I might get up one time during the middle of the night, but when I go back, I sleep. I can sleep. But, that's not to say that I don't toss and turn on occasion. And when I do, and even during the day, what keeps me awake and during the day, keeps me going during the day, is I just feel so strongly about what I write about in this book. I just want to communicate that and get that out to the world. And I want people to know what I know. And because you never know how that's going to affect somebody else that you're completely unaware of.
Right.
As an example, if somebody reads this book and then they sit on a jury, whereas if they sat on the jury before they read the book, they might be very prone to just believe what the police and the prosecutors are saying. But now when they sit on a jury, they might be more open-eyed and objective about it, and not carry with them what so many people, I think, still do, namely a presumption of guilt rather than presumption of innocence. So I hope, I want to the best I'm able to, is communicate what I've learned to others, because I was there. Before I started this work, I believe that the word of the police and the prosecutors, that was gospel, not to be questioned. Well, obviously, I have a very different view of that. So I worry about this, and I think about it a lot, how I can more effectively communicate the lessons that we've learned from our 40 years of work. And, so that's what I think a lot about.
Yeah. Well, just keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully get a little downtime in retirement.
I do. Oh, don't get me wrong. I have, well, of course, I'm just stuck in my house. I mean, I'm single, and I'm living alone, and, I'm in my house basically 24/7, and that gets old fast, but you got to stay with it.
Yeah.
I'm 78 years old, so I'm vulnerable, and I have to be very careful.
Yes.
As we all do, obviously. But and as I mentioned to you before we went on the air, so to speak, I think I suffer from what I call low-grade depression. It's getting to me, but we have to follow the rules to get rid of this thing.
We really, really do. I hope people hear that. It's not just about you and your personal health and your posture. You feel like you could conquer COVID. It's other people you have to think about. And so I do hope people are still wearing their masks and socially distancing and staying home when they can. I should have asked it sooner, but I've only interviewed one exoneree, and he said something that I've been thinking a lot about, and it's that he really wishes there was more interest and media coverage. Telling the stories after the fact is great, and we have to shine a light on what the injustice was and expose it to learn that way. But while it's happening is really important, that there needs to be more focus and attention on things as they're unfolding. And I need to go back to him and ask him more about that. But can I get your thoughts on that really quick, on how can we do that? How can we shine a light in play?
Well, what Centurion has done over the years, and that's very important. Once we have completed our investigation, before we go back to court with the new evidence, there are no surprises. We've got the case down. We're confident of our findings of fact through the new evidence. We then take it to the media, to the main line. I'm talking about Philadelphia Inquirer, Dallas Morning News, New York Times, Washington, whoever, St. Louis Post, all these. We take Baltimore Sun. We take the case for the innocence based on our facts and research and the record itself to the local mainstream, and hopefully they will see the merits of doing a story on this particular case. Because what that does is, when the story is written by their reporters, who also check our facts as well, and write the story, it's quite evident to the reader, including the local judiciary, that this person very likely is innocent. That opens up the mind to the local judge who has this case to give this the consideration that it deserves. Whereas otherwise, it would just be another petition from another inmate, and they all say they're innocent.
Right.
So it's important to. That's how we do it, and that's why we do it. So
that's part of your strategy built in at that point.
Absolutely.
Got it.
Absolutely.
Got it.
Very
okay.
important.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you. I could talk to you all day, and if you're open to talking another time, I probably will love to.
Okay. All right.
Thank you so much for being on Dialogue, a true crime conversation.
Well, Rebekah, I've enjoyed it immensely, and it was very stimulating, and keep up the good work yourself.
Thank you so much. Dialogue is a Yellow Tape Media production edited by Jason Usry and produced and hosted by me, Rebekah Sebastian. Please be sure to subscribe to Dialogue, a true crime conversation, wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media. We are at Dialogue Pod across all platforms. You can also drop me a note or a guest suggestion or sign up for my newsletter at RebekahSebastian.com. Be sure to join me every Wednesday for a new episode and another killer conversation.